Henri Fournier has traveled to all corners of the world, researching the lives of immigrants. These are their stories. I've got a special treat for you on this week's show, everyone. Today we will be hearing from my good friend, Martine. You may have read about Martine in my latest book, Without a Home. How are you today, Martine?
I'm great. Thanks for inviting me on your show, Henri.
Martine, you have lived all over the world. Algeria, Peru, Colombia, England, the U.S., and now even France. You've lived just about everywhere at some point in your life. But if you had to choose just one place, which country would you call home?
I can't say that any of the countries that I lived in have been considered my home.
There's really nowhere that you could say, this is where I belong.
Sadly, not yet.
Can you kind of talk to us about why you think that could be?
Well, Henri, I was born in Algeria. I was raised Catholic and everyone around me was Muslim, so we didn't really have a common bond at all in Algeria. I felt like I was always different and alone. So when I was old enough, I moved to Peru. As you know, though, I'm 5'9" and I'm blonde. There are very few tall blondes in South America, so even then, I didn't feel like I fit in. So I moved to Colombia. However, I still struggled to fit in and felt as if I was an other by the natives of the country. Then I moved to England, where my French accent and strange culture made it difficult for me to blend in, so I moved to the United States. I was able to live in somewhat of a normal life in the United States, but I was always felt like a foreigner. So I moved again. This time I moved here to France. I guess I would say that this is the closest I have felt to being at home, but there's still something missing.
Wow. I'm sure that's not been a very easy life for you. But there has to be some good that has come out of this, right?
Yes, by living in these countries, I have learned a lot more about myself. I have learned about my religion and the other types of religions in the countries I've lived in. I have also become more confident in my appearance and have become more educated by visiting all the wonderful countries.
That's great to hear, Martine. Thanks for coming in to share with us today.
It's always a pleasure, Henri.
Next on this week's show is Alex. Alex is a young adventurer from Romania who is joining us today via video chat from his home in Morocco. Thanks for joining us today, Alex.
Well, thanks for having me, Henri. It's an honor to be on your show.
Now, Alex, you've done a lot of traveling. What countries have you all lived in?
Well, I've lived in Iran, Bahrain, Turkey, the United States, and France.
So, I'm getting kind of the feeling that you have a calling towards the Middle East region. What drew you to this place?
Well, I've been all over the world. I've been to Europe and the United States, and I've gotten to see a lot of different cultures, but the Middle East has always been one that's really stood out to me. I really love Middle Eastern culture, their fashion, their art. It's all very enjoyable to me, and I've even learned a bit of Persian and some Arabic.
So what I'm hearing from you is there's really no reason for you to travel to these places except for just your love of their culture.
Yeah, pretty much. It's kind of an enjoyable thing to me. I kind of think of myself as an anomaly in the world. I have my Romanian passport wherever I go, and a lot of authorities kind of double take when they see that because, as you may know, Romania is exactly a good place in Europe, and a lot of bad people come out of it. So it's kind of nice, to show that I'm a well-dressed Romanian. I kind of bring that contradiction to light, and I think it's really fun and enjoyable to, learn about these other different cultures.
That's a really interesting way to look at it. I'm told that you have written a book about your travels, and in this book you question the necessity of capitalism. Can you expand on that idea for us a little bit?
Well, yeah, in my book I kind of show that capitalism is kind of turned on its head when you go world traveling for different reasons. You see, a lot of people go out into the world to maybe pull out an income to send back to their families, but when I go out and travel, I bring something else with me. I take a culture and I take an idea, and I take it all over the world, and I take other people's cultures and ideas and I kind of bring them in, and that's kind of my monetary value. That's where I get my wealth. And that's kind of what the book expresses, this idea that you don't really need an actual wealth to be wealthy.
It's a really interesting philosophy. Thanks for taking time away from your studies to share your story with us today, Mark.
It was my pleasure.
Our next guest joining us on the show this week called us to share his story with all of us. Let's hear what he has to say. Hi, Mark. Welcome to Fernier Files. Can you tell us where you're from?
Well, I was raised in France. I had lived and studied in Israel, and then I ended up moving to Monaco and to finish up my studies, and then I also teach there as well.
Wow, so what brought you to Israel?
Well, I originally went there so that way I could go ahead and study it, but I didn't really like it, so I ended up transferring to Morocco.
You know, Mark, we have something in common. I was born and raised right here in France, too. What made you want to leave this country?
To leave France, it was that way I could go ahead and study elsewhere, but it was because my parents originally were from Algeria, but with the revolution going on, they thought it would not be very good to raise me in such a climate, so they went ahead and moved to France, which is where I was raised, but I just didn't feel right there, so I moved to Israel, as I said, and then that still wasn't right, so I went to Morocco.
That's terrible the way you were treated, Mark. It's stories like yours that made me want to become a journalist in the first place. People needed to hear the terrors that you have experienced. Thanks for calling into the show.
Thanks, Henri. Keep up the good work what you're doing.
That's all we have for this week's show. Don't forget to join us next week when we dig deep into the Fernier Files to share with you some of our favorite interviews from the past year. Until then, the world is yours.